give us the differences and just what it was like to work, from, some of these smaller land companies all the way to, some public companies and then getting into private equity. How does it differ working inside those different companies?
Yeah, and so on the more the land services side, again, this is when I was in undergrad, but you kind of operated within side. You give it a section township range, you go out and you go ahead and index everything, start pulling books, start chaining title, look at the status of the section, whether HPP are open, leased, 100% leased, partially leased, and so those to me, the way I look at it, those are your bookings. Like you're living with that section for 30 days. You put together your MOR, you turn it in, you get the next one. And so going from that to Chesapeake, which at the time had, I want to say, north of 12,000 employees, probably north of 2,000 landmen. It was very exciting. It was a very exciting time to be at Chesapeake. Not to say it's not now, but it felt very energetic. And given that Chesapeake was jumping in a lot of these unconventional shale gas plays, and with an effort, with a goal or objective to go ahead and secure 500, 600, 700,000 acres, large to basically control the play, and that was fast paced. And what was interesting about the transition from Chesapeake to Apache is that Apache really didn't operate in terms of their land department, didn't operate with those aggressive leasing programs. They did a lot of farm outs. They did a lot of joint ventures. They did a lot of partnerships with other companies to get wells drilled. So I kept mentioning that rig line because you're really abiding by that rig line on a section by section basis and determining your working interest, NRI, okay, who your other partners are, who the well proposal is going to go out to, when the regulatory needs to be filed, and then you start getting elections in from other partners, and that leads to a multitude of different things. Some non-ops want to do swaps, and so they want to swap out where you just proposed a well, and they want to swap into another section that say that you operate or control. And it's like, okay, well then that leads to a whole new evaluation process. It's like, okay, well, I know that we want more working interest in this particular well, but I don't know if we want to go ahead and swap out on this other section because that might be the other section or other unit on the rig line. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of trading, a lot of swaps. And Apache, since they had been around Western Oklahoma for such a long time, there was a lot of older JOAs. And so it was a lot of updating title, updating DTOs, taking a look at the JOA to see if everybody was subject to the JOA or they were subject to a legacy force pooling back in the 80s. And so that was, I would say that was a unique transition for me, given that the models at the time were very different from a land perspective. And then going from Apache to Atalaya and then Panther and then Heritage, the model's kind of been the same where you're building an asset, you're delineating, you're appraising the asset, adding value to it. You're usually building it on the ground instead of making a large PDP acquisition that comes along, the acreage comes along with it. And so really since 2017 to now, from a land perspective, regulatory perspective, I've really done mostly the same thing in terms of building an asset, trying to add value to it through the drill bit. And then ultimately, in the past that they've sold, we've divested them. So, I think that probably answers your question, given the different lenses that you look through with, from land service company to working for publics, then on private equity.
Yeah, that talking about Chesapeake is always interesting. In those 2000s, they were doing it different than anybody, and they had a completely different model. And they were highly successful because of it. Aubrey was obviously a genius and knew how to negotiate, knew how to make deals, knew how to make money. And I remember, and I keep forgetting the point that me and you were competitors in the Fayetteville Shale, and we never met each other.
Right.
I was working for Southwestern Energy, and he was working for Chesapeake, and Southwestern was there probably 4 years prior to Chesapeake getting there. And then when Chesapeake came in, it changed the play, just instantly, day one. They were aggressive. They didn't care what it took. They'd pay anything just to get a controlling interest in an area. and the other companies had to keep up or ship out, and that was Aubrey's plan, right? So his ideal was come into a play, pay more than anybody, be more aggressive, and take control. And and companies are going to drop out because of that strategy, and it worked a lot of times. So,
Yeah.
and then you're going to Apache, who's a little bit more conservative, drawing that line, making deals with other companies. Aubrey didn't want to make a deal with anybody. He wanted to run, he wanted to run the play. I think that's an interesting contradiction there, and how successful Chesapeake was at that point in time. I mean,
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because one thing about Chesapeake jumping into these gas plays, these shale gas plays, like Fayetteville, basically Chesapeake was a little late to the Barnett. I think XTO, Mitchell, Devin bought Mitchell, and EOG. Those were the two leaders at the time, and it was still again a transitional time frame where a lot of companies didn't think that you could get hydrocarbons out of shale. So so there was still some skepticism surrounding the Barnett, and then ultimately ended up being the grandfather of all the shale plays. So Chesapeake kind of had to buy their way in through PDP and leasehold acquisitions and organic leasing too. So coming in any case, coming in a little late to the play, you're going to pay a premium, right? So jumping into the Fayetteville, where Chesapeake was, I would say, one of the leaders, getting into that play. Obviously, the discovery of the Haynesville was huge for Chesapeake, and then getting into the Marcellus. But in every case, what was great about Chesapeake, it was always technically based. So in terms of the geology and the petrophysics, the resource in place, and turning that over to reservoir engineering to run single well economics, where you didn't have a lot of data, you didn't have a lot of control, it justified being aggressive in these plays and building as large of a position as you could in that lasso around where, let's say, the Fayetteville's perspective or the Barnett's perspective. And Brandon, to your point that we never ran into each other when you were working the Fayetteville and I was too, to be fair to probably both of us, it made up about 6 or 7 counties. So, yeah. I mean, Van Buren and White really started it, but then it kind of ballooned into, with additional wells being drilled, the plays getting delineated, it's being appraised in other counties. But I can see where we did bump into each other. It's still to this day, it's a very large.
Yeah,
large
it's still
play.
massive. Flywheel's managing that now, and that was anyway. Thought that was interesting.